Hello, everyone, and welcome along to the Event Industry News podcast with me, James Dickson, wishing everybody a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever or wherever you may be tuning in to today's podcast from. With more than 8 million tonnes of plastic being thrown away each year, single-use plastic is one of the world's most talked about topics. ExCeL London is taking positive steps to reduce waste and is launching a no plastic campaign to outline the venue's commitment to this global issue. I'm delighted to say that joining us on the podcast today is Julia Galbraith from ExCeL London. Julia is the Senior Marketing Manager. Julia, thanks for joining the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me along. Hello, James.
As the introduction highlights, it's a vast amount of plastic waste that most people are aware of now. This is a subject that's been talked about not just within the events industry, but in wider, consumer communications. You look at the news every day, and most media outlets are carrying some sort of story related to this particular issue. How important is it for venues of the size and the scale and operation of ExCeL to actually address this issue and subsequently do something about it?
I think it's, we all believe that it's absolutely crucial that we should be leading the way on this topic. I mean, obviously it's something that's become quite, as you mentioned, quite prevalent in recent years, ever since, I think it was Blue Planet, and David Attenborough's sort of devastating overview of exactly how harmful our behaviours are being on the planet is something that we've been acutely aware of. And it's also something that, particularly over the last sort of year or so, we've had a lot of kind of client and visitor feedback on, where they're very much looking to us to lead the way and make changes to our sort of policies to try and reduce the amount of single-use plastic waste that this venue generates. Events by their very nature can be quite wasteful entities. When you think about events moving into a building and all of the supplies and the sort of products that they bring with them and all the carpet and the stand build, and at the end of the event a lot of that is then sort of disposed of and goes away. So we're conscious that the very nature of our business means that a lot of waste is generated. So what is really important is what little steps can we take to sort of significantly reduce the amount of waste that we generate. So it was from that starting point that we've kind of launched this campaign, which we sort of launched earlier this year, and it was a very public statement to say, look, we are absolutely 100% committed to reducing the amount of single-use plastic generated by this venue.
And you say little steps, but as a venue, you have a remit to cater for over 4 million visitors per year. So what you may consider to be little steps, actually, when you're looking at that in terms of numbers and people who are coming through your door, can have quite a big impact, even with small changes.
Absolutely. I mean, the reason I say small steps is actually the more we've delved into single-use plastic, the more aware we've become of how complex and complicated this whole area, this whole environmental issue is, be it from the kind of packaging that's being used, to how the waste is then sorted, to the sort of UK infrastructure as a whole, how set up the UK is to then deal with all of this plastic that's been generated by the consumers. So what we looked at, I mean, it was such a vast topic. So when we say small steps, we looked at what areas can we make that the most immediate impact. And our focus initially has been on the food and drink side of our business. As you may know, we have a central boulevard. There's around 27 retail units on that, selling breakfast, lunch and dinner to the 4 million visitors that we're welcoming through our venue every year. So our initial focus of this campaign has been on how are those units being operated and what can we do to reduce the amount of plastic that this venue generates.
And it might seem, I suppose, like a bit of a ruthless question to ask, but one of the initiatives and steps that I know that you guys have taken is that there's going to be the installation of permanent water fountains along public areas and along that central boulevard, as I understand it, where people with their own plastic, reusable water bottles can actually go and fill those up, and it won't cost them anything to do that. There's obviously got to be an issue relating to the revenue that impacts on when it comes to the single-use plastic bottles. Clearly, that's got to be something that as a business you would need to address before going down this route. And how did you go about doing that?
Absolutely. It does have a significant impact. I'm pleased to say that the water fountains have been installed. We installed them at the 2 water fountains at the end of last year. And yes, it's impacting on the amount of sales that we're making from plastic water bottles. But at the end of the day, our senior team are extremely mindful that this is a moral obligation now. And this is the way that the whole society is moving forward. There is an expectation from the consumer that free drinking water will be provided when they come to a space like ours. So in the last, we've had several shows in since we installed the fountains. I think we've already saved around 40,000 plastic bottles.
Right.
Fountains actually sort of count and monitor the amount of times that people are refilling their bottles. So even in the first 3 months of this year, 40,000 plastic bottles, it really highlights quite how significant the kind of drinking water problem is.
Sure. And of course, the flip side to the point I made about, the loss of revenue is that consumers are becoming more aware of it as much as venues and businesses are. They want to see that businesses and places that they're visiting are taking a step in the right direction. Consumers themselves are becoming used to carrying, reusable coffee containers, reusable water bottles with them. So actually, the public relations benefit that this can have on a venue of your scale, again, is actually going to potentially outweigh any sort of negativity from a sales point of view. You may even find that the visitors are actually spending more money because they don't feel like that they're having to shell out vast amounts for bottles of water.
Absolutely. I mean, if we're being sort of quite crude about it, there is a brand reputation issue at stake with all of this. And we have noticed, particularly since the installation of the fountains, which is a very obvious sign of our commitment to reducing single-use plastic, we have had some really positive feedback from both our immediate kind of visitors and clients, but also from a PR perspective from organisations around London who are committed to water fountains, but even further afield on international perspective, we've had feedback from international venues saying actually this is a really kind of positive and welcome step that you're taking that we will be following suit on.
And it's interesting that the plastic straw issue as well is something that amusing is not the right way to describe it, but the plastic issue as a whole, I find, is something that it took a very short period of time, seemingly, for the penny to drop amongst a vast amount of people. As you alluded to, David Attenborough did the Blue Planet episode, and suddenly it was viral. It was on every social media feed around the world, and yet it seems so obvious, doesn't it? When you actually look at it, you think, well, crikey, yes, there must be a lot of and the straw thing is a massive one, isn't it? And how many venues have we now seen abandon the plastic straws and go to stuff that is organic or and can actually degrade?
Absolutely. That was one of the sort of quick wins we immediately identified. And we're now in a position where there are no plastic straws at all at point of sale in our venue. It was even challenging, though, to do that, given that it's all to do with the different retail units. I mean, some of the retail units are owned directly by ourselves. Some are franchises from the high street. So it was trying to align ourselves with their own procurement policies and convince some of those retailers that actually this is our position, which we resolutely believe in, and we need you to follow suit. So plastic straws was one of the first areas that we tackled. We're now looking at plastic cutlery, which again should be simple, and we've removed huge amounts of plastic cutlery from the boulevard and have now replaced it with more compostable alternatives. One of the things that has made a lot of this more complicated is a lot of the times these more sustainable, more compostable alternatives tend to be more expensive. So again, you're looking as a business at the kind of impact on your bottom line, but also looking at what point can you pass that on to the end consumer, which we wouldn't want to do. But at what point does it begin to seriously affect your sort of business margins? But sure. I'm pleased to say plastic straws are gone, plastic cutlery is nearly gone, and in all of our owned units, plastic bottles are now gone. We've now replaced plastic bottles of water with either tins of water, tin cans, or glass bottles. The only time that we can't fully implement that is when there is this kind of health and safety obligation. For example, when you have lots of crowds of people and you have a more sort of music concert kind of set up, it's not safe to have glass bottles.
Of course.
So that would be the only exception we would make to that.
Absolutely. From a general, waste point of view as well, it's not just this initiative to reduce plastic waste via water bottles and via straws and simple things like that. But there's actually been quite a rethink over the whole recycling and waste disposal element of the building and the operation as a whole,
Yes.
hasn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's one thing to try and replace plastic with sustainable alternatives, but that can then become largely irrelevant if the waste itself isn't disposed of correctly. What we were finding is that there was some confusion amongst consumers as to what to then do with these end products. So what we've done is introduced brand new infrastructure into the venue. As boring as that sounds, I've been sort of highly involved in it. But what that means is that it's very clear to consumers that this is where my plastic goes, this is where my cardboard and paper goes, this is what happens to my food waste, this is where my general waste goes. And we've also had to do a little bit of an education piece around the contamination of waste, because just because an item is able to be recycled doesn't mean that it can be. If you have, let's say, a drinks bottle half filled with drink, and you add that to the sort of waste stream, essentially that contaminates that whole load of rubbish, which means that at a later stage down the waste process, it will get sent back or rejected and end up in landfill. So another piece we've had to do is try to explain to people that if this item isn't clean or empty, unfortunately, it has to go into the general waste bin as well. So it's about changing behaviours and increasing understanding of actually what happens once that kind of product has left your hands.
Sure. And of course, what you're also doing, as I see it, is really just tapping into habits that most consumers already have accessible to them now. In most parts of the country now, people will be used to having 1, 2, 3, sometimes 4 different recycling bins in their house. We don't just chuck everything in the one bin anymore. We're quite used to separating that in our home life, and that shouldn't be any different now, really, when we go out into public areas. You're not asking people to do things any differently to how they would do them at home.
No, absolutely, and we're allowing them the opportunity. A lot of consumers want to be conscientious, and they want to kind of have those domestic habits kind of achievable when they go out. And what we're trying to do is help facilitate that, and also highlight all of the other things so that they can make conscious choices. We've now introduced a sort of retail stickers scheme on all of our units. So each of our units will now have stickers which will highlight to the consumer where they can use their reusable water bottle for water refills, where they'll be offered a latte levy, a discount if they use a reusable coffee cup, and what each of the respective units' policies are on things like plastic straws, compostable packaging as well, so that they're able to make educated choices at that point of sale as well.
Absolutely. Initiatives like this are fantastic. You mentioned that the drinking fountains, 2 of them were installed at the end of last year and have already had a notable impact on the amount of single-use plastic bottles that would have otherwise been sold through the venue. But this would have taken, no doubt, a long time to plan. Changes like this don't just happen overnight. When did you first sit down really to sort of look at this and really address it as an issue and decide, right, we need to do something about it? And how soon were you able to implement the first round of changes?
I think we probably started working on this towards the summer of last year. That's when we all sat down together and said, look, we recognise that there is a big issue here and that we have an obligation to look after it. And then it all had to get signed off at a senior level. And then at that point, even as you said, something like water fountains, it's not just a case of plugging a water fountain in. We had to go and source the most appropriate suppliers. We had to select sites down the boulevard where we could kind of plumb into our existing drinking water system. We had to, you're looking at plumbing into brick walls as well, so I had to get various teams along to make sure that was possible. Then you have to look at things like the health and safety implications, where if you're providing drinking water, there has to be regular tests for things like Legionnaire's disease. So it should be a really quick thing to do, but actually we just needed to make sure that we ticked off at every point, so that it was all thoroughly done. And then we had to look at, do they actually work? And thankfully, I can say that they work and they're being utilised frequently, which is great. I think we're probably at the point now, we've got 2 in place. I think there's an appetite now for us to install even more.
Sure.
Because they have been so successful.
And I was going to say 2. I've not seen them myself, so I wouldn't know how quickly they can dispense, and operationally how many customers those 2 fountains and access points actually allow you to serve from a customer number point of view. Is it quite quick to fill it up, or will you find that there's long queues, but for people wanting to do it?
It largely depends what event you've got in tendency. For those sporting events that we have, the likes of, the London Marathon Expo, or one where people are moving around a lot, the demand for the water is high, but the fountains are set up for that. It's the sort of technology that you'll see in airports and other places where there's a high density of footfall. Mm-hmm. So actually, we haven't noticed sort of any large queues at those points. We've located them near both of our entrances so that people see them when they come into the venue, so that they know at some point that they can come back and refill their water bottles. The next stage for us is now looking at being able to directly sell those reusable water bottles. So for those people who haven't brought them along, there's an option available to them.
And when it comes to working with your own clients, the people who are actually coming in and booking the spaces that you offer there, how difficult or easy has it been to put together a communication strategy that has allowed you to talk and open up lines of communication with your own clients to really highlight what you're doing and getting them to buy into it as well? Has it been met with any objection at all? Because every event will want to do things differently based on their own particular customer base.
Absolutely no resistance at all. It's actually been very easy, because I think this is a sentiment that is shared by sort of customers and visitors alike. So a lot of the time they've been approaching us to say, this is really important to our customers. What can you do as a venue to help us with this? And thankfully, we've already got a plan and a campaign in place that we've been able to share with them. So it's been very sort of positively received.
Excellent. Just going back to what we were talking about, you mentioned about the implementation of different types of cutlery. And again, you talk about these things aloud and they might sound really trivial, but when you're dealing with the scale that you guys have to look at every day in terms of the visitor numbers, the amount of people coming through, the cost presumably is going to come down over a period of time, because it's not just you as a standalone venue suddenly deciding that you want to use compostable cutlery and get rid of the plastic stuff. This is something that's happening right across the events industry, right across consumers, right across all marketplaces. So like anything, initially there'll be a higher cost to go and buy those particular items, but one would assume that over time, as more people are buying them and as plastic becomes less desired by people, the cost will come down, won't it?
Absolutely, I would hope so. I mean, when you're sort of pioneering these new things, and as you said, there isn't that sort of big demand for them. It is challenging. I think over time, as you said, that will change. We've had a lot of internal kind of discussions as well as to if we replace plastic, let's say, with a more wood or packaging like that, how sustainable is that? And while we might be kind of getting rid of the plastic issue, are we then therefore having an impact on rainforests and wood forests? So that it's been quite difficult to go to identify the absolute best alternatives to plastic. And I think plastic in a way has been sort of demonized since the Blue Planet. At the end of the day, it's a very cheap, reliable, kind of good source of packaging, and sometimes the alternatives don't fit the same kind of criteria that plastic could provide. So we've just had to be quite open and honest with the procurement teams and our suppliers to say, what can we put in its place and what will still work and be effective for the end consumer. I think that the same applies for things like one of the things we get a lot of comments on is having put on the paper coffee cups in the venue, which, as we know, are not very sustainable. that in itself is a huge challenge, because there isn't a really viable alternative to these that can be produced on the scale at which a venue like ours might need them.
Sure.
So again, we're just exploring, looking at how the world is changing and what sort of new products come to market that might suit.
This potentially ties back into your own work with your own clients and the events that they're hosting, because I don't know if it's just me and imagining it, but when I've been in and out of exhibitions, particularly in the last 6 months, I've noticed that more and more companies are getting rid of the branded pens or the branded USB sticks, and they're having branded reusable coffee or travel coffee mugs or branded water bottles.
Yes.
There seems to be more companies who are going down that particular route in terms of the swag that they're offering on their exhibition stands. And this is potentially something that could have a sort of a big cyclical tie-in to a venue like yours. If you're hosting a major exhibitions, you know, there's a big opportunity there for companies to get their brand out there, but also for the event to promote the fact that if you go down this route, actually ExCeL has a discount on coffees if people start using their own mugs.
Absolutely.
So can you see what I'm saying there? There's a sort of big tie-in.
Yeah, there's a really nice synergy actually, and it's funny you mentioned that, because I've got a coffee cup here that was given out during ICE, Totally Gaming. Clarion Events made a big push to hand out reusable coffee cups to all of their delegates. At which point we could get involved and say, if you bring along this reusable coffee cup and take it to these establishments on our boulevard, you'll get a 10% discount on the coffee that you
Sure.
buy. So the more aligned we can be with organisers on initiatives like this, the more successful we can make them.
Absolutely. And alignment, as you said, is key, because projects and initiatives like this, call them what you will, they do only work when everybody is on the same page.
Yes.
When you're trying to sort of, for want of a better phrase, flog a dead horse, you know, push an initiative onto people who don't want to interact with it, who don't want to engage with it, where other parties are not wanting to engage with it, then it doesn't work. Stuff like this will only work and can only make an impact if everybody buys into it.
Exactly. And as you mentioned when we started talking, this is a global hot topic, and it's quite rare for somebody now to turn around and not be aware of the issue or want to do something about it. Mm-hmm. The more challenging areas are those things like the slightly less sexy areas, let's say like increasing energy efficiency around the venue, or getting rid of other waste sources which are not so well known about. Therefore, it can be sometimes more challenging to have those conversations with clients about why our approach is X or X to this matter.
And I know today's podcast has very much been focused around this drive to reduce the single-use plastic on site at ExCeL, but as part of your sort of wider corporate social responsibility strategy, are there any other initiatives and areas that you guys are going to be looking to identify and work on? I know that there have been huge changes to the public transport infrastructure in and around ExCeL in recent years. Crossrail will eventually bring trains right alongside it when it does actually go live. But in terms of stuff like transport, you know, reducing the amount of people who are using cars to get to the venue, is this something that's always on your radar as well? And does that tie in very much with this whole CSR strategy?
Absolutely. So when it comes to parking and public transport, our preference is that all visitors kind of come to the venue via public transport. It's a much more sustainable means of moving around. And part of the reason why our sort of pricing strategy on our car parks is to help. I mean, a lot of feedback may be that it's a high tariff to pay. One of the reasons we have done that is to try and push people towards using public transport as an alternative. So yeah, those sort of things do play out in other areas as well.
And it's difficult. I appreciate the way that you phrase that, but you have to put in a deterrent, you know, call it what you will, but if you want people to go to public transport, you have to try and do or take steps to move them away from even wanting to take the car there. And if they think that there may be, you know, a tariff that they think, well, actually, no, I'm better off going on the tube, then so be it. You know, I don't think that personally, I don't think that there's anything wrong with that at all. I mean, the flip side to that is that with some of your business events, inevitably you're going to get people who will just pop it on the company credit card and who don't care what, and who will still come. But anybody who's driven to ExCeL will know that it's far easier to get there on the train and by public transport than it is driving. You know, who wants to tackle London in a car at the time of day when you've got to get to an exhibition or a conference? Absolutely not.
And yeah, I mean, London traffic is a problem. And let's face it, London is introducing all of these initiatives now to try and deter people away from vehicles. You've got the congestion charges, you've got the ultra low vehicle emission charges that are being applied as well, which over time I think will have an impact on our venue, as well as those kind of congestion zones kind of widen.
Yeah,
absolutely. So again, what we're doing as a venue is reflected at a wider sort of social level as well.
Absolutely. We've been joined on today's podcast by Julia Galbraith. Julia is a senior marketing manager at ExCeL London, and we've been talking today about the 8 million tonnes of plastic that are thrown away each year, and how single-use plastic is definitely one of the world's most talked about topics, and some of the steps that ExCeL are taking to help reduce the amount of single-use plastic that's being consumed and utilised on site. Julia, are there any particular social media handles or pages or parts of your website that explain a little bit more about the steps that you guys are taking? If people want to find out more about what ExCeL are up to, how can they do that?
Absolutely. So we have, if anyone wants to find out more about our policies, not only to do with single-use plastic, but also our kind of commitment to deliver a positive legacy for our business. So that includes all the work that we do with charities and all the environmental practices we undertake. We have a dedicated sustainability page on our website, excel.london/sustainability. And then all the kind of immediate details about what we're doing in terms of plastic can be found at excel.london/no-plastic.
Fantastic. Anybody who wants to find out a little bit more about the subject matter and what we've been talking about on today's podcast, head over to those links and do your own digging. It's well worth it, and will have a big impact for us all in the long term. Julia, thanks very much for joining the podcast today.
Thank you.
If you are listening to the audio-only version of this podcast, then head over to eventindustrynews.com. You can watch videos of all of our podcasts, get up to date with all of the latest news within the various sectors of the events industry, and there are loads of special features and supplements as well that you can download and keep relevant to several different areas of the events industry. If you are on eventindustrynews.com watching today's podcast, don't forget you can also go over to your favorite podcast platform and download audio versions to listen to on your commute to and from work, or if you're out walking the dog, whatever floats your boat. That brings us to the end of today's episode. Thanks very much once again to our guest Julia Galbraith from ExCeL, and we'll see you on the next edition of the podcast. Thanks very much and goodbye.
Thanks, bye.